Okay, I'm back. I got cut off there at the end because there's a 15-minute limit and I was all worked up, so I forgot about the time. So here I am. Hopefully this second video won't be cut off. Let's return to where we were. So, at the end of Heathwood's essay, he considers some objections to his view. We've already talked about the confused thinking objection. Another objection is, look, if the satisfaction of my desire is necessary and sufficient to promote my own good, well, look, a lot of my desires don't have anything to do with me or get satisfied in ways that I'm maybe not aware. So, like, let's say I have a strong desire that my uncle be happy. That's not a self-directed desire. So first of all, how does a other-directed desire, how does the satisfaction of that benefit me, according to, Heathwood's view? Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always in any clear sense. Secondly, many of my desires, like my desire for my uncle's happiness, might be satisfied without my knowing it. He might become happy living out in California, and I haven't talked to him in years. But I have this desire that he be happy. Last time I saw him, he was unhappy, and I formed the desire for his happiness. 20 years pass, he's living far away, now he's happy. Well, it's a satisfied desire of mine, but I don't know about it. I don't know about how he became happy, or I don't know anything about it. So how did that improve my life, right? Something happened that I'm not aware of. It satisfied some desire of mine. Okay, so that forces Heathwood to revise his view a little bit. Not all of our desires are ones the satisfaction of which will promote our good. Only ones that are maybe self-directed to some degree, or ones that we're aware of when they're satisfied. Okay, so let me present this. Sorry, I wasn't fully presented. This leads to Hooker, right? Hooker, looking at various objections like the ones I just mentioned, thinks about how to defend an objective approach to well-being. And he starts from the sort of claim that getting what you want is not the fundamental measure of welfare. And he's going to try to defend that claim. Heathwood is committed to the claim that getting what you want is the measure of welfare, the only measure of welfare. Hooker thinks it may be one measure, but not the fundamental measure. There are more objective measures of human welfare. There are things, he wants to say, that are intrinsically good for us and make our lives better, whether we desire them or not. Similarly, there are ways in which we can get what we want and not, that don't benefit us, right? So he thinks that that's also possible. And so for Hooker, welfare is not a purely subjective quality. Welfare is more like morality, right? Whether an action is right or wrong is independent of what I happen to desire at the moment. Similarly, whether my life is going well or not is at least partly independent of how I feel at the moment or what I desire at the moment. That's what he's going to try to defend. Going back to my original point in the first video, Hooker believes that welfare has to do with satisfying desires that are worth desiring, right? Or desires for things that are worth desiring. And he can explain that distinction. He can explain why that distinction matters. So let's say I desire to be a better father, right? That's an example of something that is worth desiring on Hooker's view. And so when I satisfy that desire by becoming a better father, that makes my life better. But it doesn't follow from that getting what I want is the fundamental measure of welfare. Here, the measure of what's making my life go better is fatherhood. Like I'm thriving as a father, right? I'm a good father. That's the measure. And however we determine that, right? But that's not entirely up to me, right? Just because I think this is the best way to be a father doesn't mean it is, right? We have a way of talking about what being a good father consists in. And if that's something worth desiring, right, then, achieving that will improve my life. But not just because I want it, but because it's something worth wanting, because I've gotten something that is worth wanting, being a good dad, or something along those lines, okay? So welfare is not a purely subjective quality, Hooker will argue. Here's his proposed list of what he calls intrinsic goods, or fundamental goods, that are good independently of our desires or attitudes. Pleasure is one that he considers. Sometimes, I'm in a bad mood and I'm not thinking about experiencing pleasure, but, I can be surprised, right, by pleasure, even though I don't really desire it, right? But there are certain forms of pleasure that just make your life better, whether it's what you want at the moment or not, right? I mean, that's an interesting claim. Significant achievement, right? I think this is an important thing to look at, right? It's not just that I want to satisfy my desires. That's not the only measure of my welfare, but whether I'm achieving something significant, right? That has significance for me and and outside of, my ego, but like has a wider significance, right? So achievement, not just the satisfaction of desires, but achievement. Knowing things that are important to know. Becoming more informed. Okay, this is something worth desiring, but even if you don't desire it, it's something that it makes our lives better, even if we kind of struggle with it and we resist it to some degree. Most of the time, I think we kind of, when we discover things, it makes our lives easier, like, because knowledge is power, knowledge is useful, but some knowledge is hard, right? Sometimes it's hard to learn to make discoveries, but even those difficult discoveries, right, can make our lives better, is the thought here. Autonomy, freedom, right? The appreciation of beauty. We haven't talked about that. We've talked about freedom a little bit already in the context of Charlie, right? And Heathwood thinks that autonomy is something that only has value insofar as I desire it, right? It doesn't improve my life or benefit me unless I want it. Hooker thinks of autonomy as something that potentially has intrinsic value. It contributes to our welfare all by itself. Same with beauty, right? I don't know. Imagine a person who doesn't have a place in her life for the appreciation of beauty, right? Is her life less good, right? Is her welfare affected by a growing appreciation of beauty? Morality, right? Being a good person, being a generous person, right? Does that contribute to her welfare in an objective way? Friendship, right? Okay, having more friends makes your life better, right? Okay, so this is the idea here, and he kind of conducts a thought experiment. This is his argument. Like, think about two lives. Right, so let's go to friendship. Imagine one life in which the person has all of the happiness and pleasure and all of these other goods in her life. Okay, but she lacks friendship. And another person who has all these goods, including friendship. She has friends. Well, we can ask, well, would one life be better, objectively speaking? If all we know is that these two lives, but one of them lacks friendship and the other doesn't, would one life be better, the one that has friendship? Well, would having that good all by itself benefit the person living that life, other things being equal? So we ask that question. Now, if we think yes, right? If I imagine two lives and the only difference between them is that one has friendship and the other doesn't, right? Intuitively, the thought is, well, having friends would make that life better. But why? What's the explanation? Is it just that it would make your life more pleasurable? Well, in that case, friendship wouldn't be an intrinsic or fundamental good. It's just instrumental to the good of pleasure. Would it just be a way of satisfying more of your desires? Well, that would push in the direction of a more subjective account. Friendship all by itself, does not contribute to well-being, only insofar as it satisfies desires, right? Or maybe you think friendship is part of what enables me to be more autonomous, more free, right? Without friends, I can't be as free as I want to be. And so the good of friendship is related to the good of freedom, right? But if the explanation then, though, is that no, friendship is good for its own sake, right? Having friends doesn't necessarily make your life more pleasurable. It doesn't necessarily make it possible for you to achieve more things that are valuable to you. It doesn't necessarily increase your knowledge or freedom or your ability to appreciate beauty or be a good person. It's just good for its own sake, right? If that's the explanation, right, that the good is intrinsic or fundamental to well-being, then that's the conclusion we should draw, he thinks. If the best explanation for why we think a life with friendship is better than a life without friendship is that friendship is fundamental to well-being, then we should draw that conclusion. And so he kind of makes that argument, conducts that thought experiment for everything on the list. And he has different things to say about each. But you can do the work of applying his thought experiment and draw the conclusion that you would draw. Which of these things on the list would you say are intrinsically good? Like, having them all by itself makes your life better. Even if you don't happen to desire it at the time, even if it doesn't, give you the felt experience of pleasure, right? So pleasure would be an example of something that, in some sense is not independent of the felt experience, but sometimes we don't desire it, right? Right, considering these things on the list, right, does Hooker make a case that well-being is objective, in the sense that there are more than one fundamental measures, or that getting what you want is not the fundamental measure, right? That the fundamental measure of whether your life is going well is whether you're experiencing pleasure, achieving significant ends, developing your mind and discovering important knowledge, right? That you enjoy some measure of freedom, that you're able to appreciate beauty, that you're engaged in a project of becoming a better person, and that you have connections to other people that you would call friends, right? These are aspects of a good life, right? These different goods play a role in a good life, right? In different ways for different people, right? But the point is that some measure of these goods, right, all by themselves make your life better. That's the argument that he's making. Okay, so that's the test for objectivity, for whether a good has merely subjective value or whether it has objective value. So I'm going to do one more video, but this leads to Wolf. Okay, Wolf is also raising a similar kind of question. She calls it the question of self-interest. In what does a person's self-interest consist? And she defines that. To act in one's own self-interest, on page 54, is to act on the motive of advancing one's own good. So that's her way of formulating the question of welfare. So what is one's own good? Right? There's three different options. We've looked at hedonism. We've looked at Mill and Epicurus. Okay, some account of the felt experience of pleasure or happiness is the measure of one's own good, right? That's what one's own good consists in. So I'm promoting my self-interest if I am increasing the felt experience of pleasure or happiness in my life. That's hedonism. The preference theory, which is Heathwood, is that the measure of my own good is the satisfaction of desire, right? That's what my self-interest consists in, satisfying my desires, whatever they happen to be. That's a purely subjective account. So is hedonism to some extent, right? Because it understands one's good in relation to felt experience of your own, something in the subject. Whereas objectivist theories, right, the idea is that there is some way of describing or accounting for one's good that doesn't depend on the satisfaction of desire and doesn't depend on the felt experience of pleasure or happiness. There are ways in which one's life can be going well, in which I can promote my own good without satisfying desires of mine or without feeling the experience of pleasure. Okay, autonomy might be a good example of that. Becoming more autonomous might not feel good, right? Might not lead to the felt experience of pleasure, and it might not satisfy any particular desires I have right now. That might not be the best way to explain why I value freedom, right? I might value it for other kinds of reasons, and becoming more free might make my life better, independently of my preferences and my felt experiences. Another way to put it is, right, there's more to promoting your own good than just satisfying your preferences or feeling pleasure. There's something more to it. Okay, and so that's the objective list theory that that Hooker considers. We're done now, but I'll pause and we'll look at the next video at this idea of meaning. Is meaning something that we seek for its own sake? Is that part of what it means to promote your own good or promote your own self-interest? Okay.